All right, everyone, welcome back to our conversation with Derek Elliott. And we just had talked about a lot of marketing strategy per se, but Derek is not really doing strategy, but he's just being himself and work with the flow and doing really good marketing. So in this particular video episode, we are going to talk about the pricing, and I'm gonna throw a lot of questions, Derek, into really to know how much you charge and how you do this pricing. So without further ado, let's get started. So Derek, first thing first, I know you have a big social media following. I know there are clients directly come to you. Now is the time people want to work with you. And how do you determine the cost of project? And what kind of factors do you put into consideration when you're dealing with a budget?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to think about is, obviously you need to be covering your expenses. You need to be charging enough so that, if you're working 24 hours a day, you still are making enough money to survive. So there's sort of a baseline for anyone, but that's not something that the client really sees. They, just because you have these expenses doesn't necessarily mean your work is worth a certain amount. So that's kind of a personal thing that you need to be thinking about in terms of the prices. What do I need to be charging at least so that this is worth my time? But beyond that, I think that, another big factor that comes into play is how beneficial it's going to be to the client. So if they're going to be able to sell 1 million units of whatever you're doing a 3D animation of, based off of your animation, then how much is that worth to them? And then, you need to consider it's always finding a balance. There's a certain price, and this is the way I usually like to describe it, is there's a price where when you do the job, you'll think, wow, I can't believe they paid me that much to do it. And then on their side, they're thinking, wow, I can't believe we got that for that price. So, there's sort of this, and you just need to be somewhere in that middle ground where they think they got a good deal and you were happy to do the work for that price. So that's how a lot of, picking a price, finding a price will sort of come back to finding that sweet spot. And you won't always find that sweet spot. It may be that someone is not willing to pay as much as you would need to make in your mind to make that project worth it, in which case that's a project that you should walk away from. Ideally, sometimes you maybe have to take on a project that you don't want to do, or maybe you don't think is going to pay very well, just because you need the work and you need to make some money, even if you feel like you're taking a loss on it. I've been there before, but I think that's the biggest thing to take into consideration is just, are you going to be happy doing that amount of work for that price? And then you can kind of scale it up and down until you find a happy medium where they're also happy to pay that price.
So basically you want to really ask yourself your current situation to see how much can I afford to take on a project, instead of like really just set up a set price to do everything the same. Because you want to know your current situation. If you can afford to living, then you probably have a higher chances to say no to some project, and then you want to bid on the higher project and maximize your time and the profit. So that's the one thing needed into consideration. How's your current pricing structures? Are you charging project by like a big number? I give you a big number and this is what I do, or do you charging your clients saying, well, this is a project come in, I charge hourly after I work this with hourly pricing. So how do you do that?
For me, pretty much all the time nowadays, I will do fixed price projects where I'll usually present someone with a couple of options. Once I have a very clear understanding of what their goals are, what they want to do, I'll try to lay out 3 options that I think will help us achieve those goals 3 different ways. And the prices would usually be different. So there'd be 3 different prices. We can call them, small, medium, and large. And they would, ideally they would look at those three options, and I want it to be something that's very clear. So the deliverables would be in there, but not just thinking about, oh, this is going to be a 30-second animation or a 15-second animation, but also thinking about the deliverables from their end. This is going to help you show this part of the product. This is going to help you look good on social media. What are the actual business outcomes for them of each of these options, and trying to lay those out. But yeah, from there, just presenting, a fixed price with a set timeline and a set, number or type of deliverables, so that it's very clear, how long you're going to spend on the project, what you're going to be delivering, and then obviously the price, so that they don't. And that's one, I have worked with hourly pricing before. And that's one, it's really the easiest way to price, is just to put time, put a price on your, come up with an hourly rate. But then you get into a sort of weird situation where they're paying more if it takes longer, which doesn't really make sense. You would think that they'd want to pay more to get it faster. So it just doesn't really work well for either you or the client. So I pretty much never do hourly pricing now. Sometimes in certain cases with larger companies, they like to work on a day rate or something like that, especially if it's not easy to define the scope at the beginning of the project, you don't know exactly what you're going to do, then occasionally I'll work with a day rate. But for the most part, I try to very clearly define what we're going to be doing, when it's going to be done by, and then I give them one price, and it's sort of up to me to figure out how to reach those goals within that time frame for that price.
That's great information. Thank you, Derek. But I want to point it out for our subscribers and the viewers. And Derek is already in the chapter 10 or something. But if you're in the chapter 1 of your own book, you probably need to be more flexible. And just like Derek said, at the beginning, sometimes they're just charging a day rate or charging by hourly. But there are times, the more the practice, you will do a fixed pricing on your project. So stay this open. Doesn't have to be the master Blender already do this fixed pricing. You have to do this. But if you have no understanding about the scope of work and how much you can work or what can you do, probably it's difficult to come up with a fixed price to do what you do. So, and also Derek mentioned the hourly pricing is kind of feeling is being punished by being efficient, right? You doing things very difficult, but the person you can make it faster, but you're getting less paid. That doesn't make sense. So I wanted all of you guys to put this into consideration, to think about your current situation. There's no standard answer to solving the problem. So would you mind to share us what is your current project starting price? Like, how do you come up with this number, and help you out a little bit?
Yeah, so I had on my website for a while, I can't remember if I moved it or not, that custom projects started at $20,000. I think I had that on there because it would turn away people with no budget. But, I realized I don't necessarily want to turn away everyone, because I am willing to do projects that are less than that. But I would say nowadays I don't do many projects that are less than $5,000, just because there's a certain amount of overhead that comes with just planning the project, doing the work, emailing, downloading files, rendering. There's certain just kind of givens with any project that you have to account for, and when it starts to get to be below $5,000 or so, that's where it, no matter how simple it is, it becomes to feel a little bit like a distraction. Like there's probably something else I could be working on, or maybe I am spending more time on a personal project or marketing that would bring in a bigger budget client. Because, while I feel like I could probably stay busy doing, $1,000 project every day, well, I probably couldn't stay that busy, but that would be $30,000 a month. But I'd be sending so many emails, I'd be chasing down invoices, I wouldn't know, which project took priority or who had what revision. So I try to keep a pretty limited amount of projects on my plate at any one time. So, in order to allow for that, there's sort of a range I want to work within. And I would say that's probably a more realistic number of what most projects start at, is around $5,000.
Well, I think for a lot of creatives or Blender artists, $20,000 or $5,000 still a rocky high numbers for them. But I think to building the experience and to did a lot of work over the years, it certainly put a lot of stress on you to be a creative. To say, well, some projects lower than that is not really my thing I can do. I cannot really afford for the opportunity cost, because if I onboarding your clients on this project, I wouldn't be able to do some higher paid project. And for us, we love what we do. We love to create art, but sorry, we live in the reality. We still need to pay bills, right? So we need to maximize our profit to really do what we love. So how do it feels like to working as a freelance 3D artist, directly working with the clients? And do you think you have a more freedom to pick and choose, or in order to really maximize your highest paid project? Because I think you just kind of briefly talk about it, and we wanted to know the lifestyle that, or even some challenges or advantage to being a 100% freelance artist, to working with client directly.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it because I like the sort of the initial call, the sales call, where you're figuring out what they're looking for and deciding, is this something that you can help them with, or is it a project you should walk away from? So I really enjoy that aspect, and yeah, with that, being able to decide, what project do you want to do, which one do you not want to do. So the freedom that comes with that ability to pick and choose. But it took a long time to get to that point, and I still don't have so many projects coming in that I can just say no until the best thing ever comes along or the biggest budget. So it depends, but there's I do like, and I suppose if you're asking about being freelance, would be maybe versus working within a studio or something, where you wouldn't have any control over what projects you're working on. Something your boss is deciding. I certainly like the ability, but it does come with a little bit of risk. If I'm turning, maybe I don't want to do one project because it seems boring 1 month, and I'm holding out for a better project, but that better project might not come, or it might not come for 6 or 8 months. So you do still have to maybe take on a project every once in a while that doesn't feel like the best, but you want to still be able to fill your time enough that you feel like you're not just wasting the days away waiting for the perfect client, because they may never come, or it may take them a long time to come. But overall, I guess to answer your question, yes, I thoroughly enjoy being able to choose what I do work on.
I just want to know probably how much time that you will invest when you're onboarding a project. Like, what is the average time length when you finish your project in the current stage?
So, are you asking how long to...
So when you start a project, how long to finish a project? How many weeks or months are taking on your side?
It depends. Yeah, so it definitely depends. I mean, obviously, typically a lower budget project would get done faster than a higher budget project, but not always. I mean, there's projects that have taken me 2 months to complete that maybe I got paid $5,000 for, and there's projects that took me 1 month to complete that I got paid $50,000 for. So there's a lot of factors, obviously, and sometimes you need to be charging more for a shorter project if it's a big project and they need it quickly, because then you're working later nights, or you're working on the weekend, and there's time involved in figuring out how to do what they're looking for. So it obviously it depends quite a bit, but the majority of my projects are, I would say, taking between 3 and 8 weeks. But again, depends a lot on the client. Sometimes even if you think you've got the scope really well defined, maybe there's something you didn't understand, or they didn't explain clearly enough, or maybe you didn't ask the right questions to understand that at the beginning of the project. But yeah, I would say the majority of projects for me, from the time we pick a start date and they're ready to go into, delivering the final project and saying goodbye is usually not much faster than 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And for me, usually not longer than about 2 months. So like 8 weeks or so. And that's kind of the sweet spot for me. Like if I've been working on a project for 2, 3, 4 months, which I have before, it starts to get taxing. You get way less interested in it because every project is amazing at first. You're so excited to get started. But that, at least for me, tends to fade very quickly. So, it's kind of like as soon as someone decides they're going to pay me to do something, my brain just shuts off and doesn't want to do that thing. So it varies, but yeah, 2 to 8 weeks or so.
It feels like there's one information slip off where we're just talking about, so Derek's charging different industry, different clients, or different project with different price. So you're doing this price differentiation between different clients. And I know what is the correct way to think about this, but I'm just going to ask questions for a lot of other creatives or beginners. Do you think it would be fair to charging out different clients with different price?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there are projects that I've done that took a very long time and were a lot of work that I didn't get paid much for. And there's projects that I did very quickly that I got paid 3 times as much for. So it all depends so much on the client and the job, and there's just different. Again, back to one of the first things we talked about, which is, there's a price that they're willing to pay, that they're happy to have it done for. And there's a price that you'd be happy to do it for. So that's going to vary. At a big company with a huge marketing budget and, they need to get a television advertisement out in 2 weeks, that if they're asking you for that, it's because the leaders within their business think they need to get that done. It's important. There's obviously some reason why they think that needs to get done. So you can approach them with a much higher price because, that range where they decide, that's too much is a lot higher than, a small one-man show getting started on like a Kickstarter campaign. They just don't have the same budget. So I think it's totally okay, as long as you're working within that general understanding of, what's a price I'm going to be happy to do this for, and what's a price that they're going to be happy to pay. But it also depends on the relationship and maybe what past projects you've done with them, because there's some clients where maybe I could have charged them way more, but let's say I'm happy to do the project, very happy to do a project for $20,000, but I think maybe their budget is $50,000. Well, maybe I'll only charge them the $20,000, or maybe I'll bump it up to $30,000, because the more I charge, it also starts to put a little bit more pressure on myself. So if I think I'm going to be just making buckets of money and it's way more than I need to make, then I'm not just going to charge that because I think I can, because you also don't know, at the end of the project, what if they're not super happy with the work, or maybe they think that, well, that was pretty good, but it was really expensive. They're still okay with the price, but you need to find a balance.
I totally agree with that. And one thing I want to kind of leverage, talk about this, because you're in the 3D space, and I came from the photography space. And for images, people were getting a certain project by how many images they want for a certain project. But please do not think about, you have to have a standardized, price for each image or each render per se, because all your price, everything you charge is based on your client. What kind of clients are you working with, and what kind of budget they do. I'm telling you, you are going to be the best person to deliver what you can do and to helping them out. If they see this project you did, it's very valuable for their business, they're willing to pay you a higher price. It doesn't mean it has to be more complicated, more difficult, or faster. Everything is negotiable. So you wanted to focus having this strong mindset to know what you can deliver and what kind of value you can provide for your clients. That is the main focus. So I think that's just fantastic. And I'm glad that Derek, you shared about this really important things to letting beginners know. There's no such a thing that a standard price for each render images. Because I got a DM a lot. It's like, how much do I charge for per image, per render?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't
Yeah.
give you a
And
price on that.
I have clients that come to me a lot and they ask about that specifically. How many images do we get for because when I'm talking about giving 3 price options and let's say the first option is $10,000, it'll usually say that, oh, this will have, some images and a short animation or something like that. And they'll start to get real specific, like, well, how many images do I get for option 1? And I usually just kind of sort of jokingly will say, like, I'll give you as many as you want, because I try to disconnect that. I mean, the work is really in, the skill to build up that model, the textures, the lighting, to do the animation. Once that's all set up, I mean, for me to render an image takes, 12 seconds once everything's all set up. So it's kind of like making a joke out of it, in that I'll give you as many as you want. Like, do you really, if I give you 1,000 images, are you really going to feel like you got a better deal than if I gave you 7 really good images? Like, you don't really need 1,000 images. So it's a lot of people do seem to get hung up on that. And I think that that's extremely unimportant. I mean, if someone actually wanted 1,000 images for me, I would be charging more than I would if they only wanted 10. But yeah, it's not so much about the deliverable, in that level of granularity.
Yeah, fantastic, man. Like I have same feelings about photography as well. When clicking everything, lighting setup, I just click. I even quicker than the render. Like I click a second, and then it's getting image. Then next question I want to know, like when you working on a project, you're already onboarding, doing this, and then they are trying to say, well, we want to rush the project. We getting something done quicker, or we need asking for more revisions about the stuff they do. They just don't like it. It feels like, well, I didn't do. How do you handling this type of issues? Are you charging additional fee with this, or have you already talked them ahead of time before they onboarding the project?
So usually when someone's asking for, maybe an excessive amount of changes or something like that, I would usually push back a little bit. For one, do I agree with what they're saying? I mean, and a lot of times what somebody might be asking for is really more of a stylistic choice. And it's like, well, I don't like this. It's like, well, why don't you like that? And that's where it's really important to have your actual like business goal in mind. Like if the goal is to show a feature of a product, it's a little less subjective. It's like, well, does this accomplish this or does it not? And if it gets down to style, then I would push a little bit back. And I'm a friendly guy. I'm always easy to work with in this regard. And if somebody wants a change, I'll work with them on that and do it. But that's another situation where it's really important to have a deadline. So when you're putting together your scope of work or you're sending over that kind of initial proposal, have a really harsh deadline so that the client knows, if they want to change something, then we're going to maybe have an issue hitting that deadline. Or like, yes, I can make that change, or we can spend some more time working on this part of the project, as long as they know that with that more time spent in this one place where I thought we were going to be able to move on, it's going to take away from another part of the project. So that's why having a deadline is really important. And I've found that it can be difficult for me to work on projects where there isn't a very hard deadline. It's one thing to say, oh, we need to get everything done by March 15th. But if when March 15th comes around and they want to make more changes, but it's like, well, that was the deadline, but we've got a couple extra weeks. And that starts to get really fuzzy because, I work with a very particular workflow so that I can hit that end date. So that's one thing that I don't like is when, all of a sudden there's 6 more weeks that we can work on. It's like, well, no, I don't want to work on the 6 more weeks. And I would have approached this totally different. I would have spent more time storyboarding. And that's another thing with, revisions is ideally you're working in a linear process where you're not backstepping much. So, you're giving very clear direction from the get-go. This is what we're going to be delivering. And then, you've got storyboards or sketches and they can see that and say, yes, this looks good. And then you move to the next step. Yes, this looks good. And move to the next step and so on. So that you would never really allow a point for any major backstepping, more than 1 or 2 steps back. So that's another part of it, is just managing the project as you go so that you don't run into those revisions. I know that's something that people think about and talk about a lot in freelancing is how many revisions does the client get? How many, and it can be different. If you're designing a logo or something like that, I realize that can end up being a little bit more subjective, but I don't really deal too much with revisions in the work I do. It's really, I try to be very clear and very open line of communication with the client about what we're doing. And I want to make sure that we are both on the same page so that there really is never a need for revisions. It's a collaborative process all the way to the end. And, if there's a need for a revision, it's because they did a poor job of communicating something to me earlier in the process. So, that's how I handle revisions is, to try to avoid them altogether.
Well, I think we have like similar thinking process to solving this, or even avoid the revision, is by having really clear communication. From my personal experience, I think at the beginning, I'm already aware that a revision or things to be rushed on a certain deadline, I need to talk this thing ahead with my kind of filtering out the clients. Is the client really kind of easy to work with me, or is the client I want to work with? And once we know this relationship is built, and it feels like if they do revision, it's not going to be like, oh, let's redo this. It's not going to be something super difficult to do, and that client is easy to work with. I think it will be much easier down the line that, okay, so if we're going to want to do some minor changes, I gave him some advice, we can do so. But it's never something that dramatic, like, well, we need to redo this project. I think having proper communication really minimize this issue down the line to helping you to kind of avoid that eventually, or to do this. Yeah, I think we have similar type of thinking as well. I'm glad I'm aligned with your mindset. It's good. That's certainly a good thing. Yes. Last questions. I want to say, well, when people having objections on the price, because we're talking about price, when new clients talk to you, say, hey, Derek, I love your work. I like to work with you, but your price is way too high. And I know someone can do cheaper price, very similar style. And they've been watching your tutorials. They know how to do your stuff. And then how do you handle this kind of price objections when you're having clients like that?
Yeah, well, this is where it's really important to be in a position where you don't need the project. So you don't want to get into a situation where you need the project and you're willing to bend over backwards with the deliverables or your price to meet them there. So the best way to handle it, if it's, if they say it's too expensive, then, I'll have some room for flexibility where I can say, okay, well, maybe we extend the deadline. Maybe we, it's funny. Sometimes I'll do both. It's like, I'll either extend the deadline because then that means I don't have to focus on it as much. It's a little less work on my end. I can maybe have 2 projects going at the same time. Or in some cases I'll say, okay, well, let's shorten the deadline. Like, okay, I can do that for $5,000 less, but we're going to bring the timeline in a week and we're going to be done with it. So, because what that kind of does is limit the ability to do all those revisions and things like that. So it's funny. It's like, I'll either extend it or pull it back. And also just reducing the scope. So, if their budget isn't so far off, then maybe I'll be able to, like, okay, well, maybe we can't do this complexity in the animation, but we can do something else. I think that's one thing I enjoy a lot about 3D is it's really easy to kind of turn up or turn down the quality in terms of the amount of animation, the length of the animation, how complex the environment is. There's a lot of things you can do to make it simple on yourself to sort of meet them in a place that works. But you never really want to just go down on your price. So if I give someone a proposal that's 10,000, 15,000, and 20,000, there's my dog, and they say, "Oh, that's too much. Can we do it for 5,000?" I would never just say, "Okay, sure, we can do the first option for 5,000." Because then it's like, well, where did you come up with that price in the first place? And they start to poke holes in your pricing structure. But so yeah, I would say that I try to try not to come down on the price is the first thing. And then, if they're just totally misaligned, then that's where you want to be in a point where you can just turn down the job. They say, "Oh, well, I can get someone else to do this for cheaper." It's like, well, then why'd you call me? And I've done that before. I've, people, I don't get that so much now. And that comes a lot to the way you present yourself online and, having that kind of big number on your website. This is what projects start off, to try to turn away people like that. Because ideally they come to my website, they see that the work is super high quality, and they know it's probably going to be expensive. So, if someone comes and say, "Oh, I can get somebody else to do this for cheaper," it's like, then you're wasting your time talking to me. Then go hire them. And sometimes they're just saying that to try to get you to come down on the price. But they'll say, "Oh, well, they're not, their work doesn't look quite as good." It's like, okay, well, so here's the price. So it always depends on the individual situation, but for the most part, there's not really any discounting, but I'll always work with a client if it's a project I want to do to find a price where we're both happy.
I enjoy to hear all this thinking from your side, and I'm trying to be the person to summarize your points and to kind of recap the stuff. But I think you pointed to some really important things in this messaging. So one is the positioning. You're talking about, hey, when you look at my website, social media, everything I put it up is for a purpose, to position myself. This is going to be expensive. You're not going to hire Derek for $2,000 or $1,000 to do it. You see this, and people immediately perceive the value of the quality of your work and stuff. So that is going to reduce a lot of people to say, well, the price is too high. That's what you get. And the second, I think you have a really good, strong mindset to saying, well, I'm not going to just decrease the price just because you ask, because I can modify the project, the size, the scope of the work in order to allow me to properly to serve you still with my rate. I'm getting what I deserve to pay. You're getting what your value you can get. So this is going to help both parties. I think this is very, very important for a lot of beginners, and they're desperate to wanting to having a project without think about the scope of work, without think about how much value they can providing for the clients. I think this is great.
Yeah, and a lot of times, if someone does have a really simple project, and I'll tell them, like, yes, this is something I can do, and here's what the price would be, and I'll just tell them straight up that, like, there are people that could probably do this for quite a bit less expensive than I can. And I actually had a client like that recently, and I'm still working with them now. That was actually the call I was on right before this. But when they reached out to me, and what they wanted were what I thought were pretty simple renders, and I just figured for what he was asking, he probably wasn't going to want to pay this much. But he had a healthy budget. He was like 10,000, and I was like, okay, like, making sure he knows that there are people that could probably do a pretty good job for quite a bit less. But he said that, I've worked with people, and they didn't get it done, or it just wasn't quite the right quality, or maybe they had gone through those routes like Upwork and Fiverr, and they just didn't have a good experience, and they didn't want to, because then they're starting to waste their time managing these projects. So that's when it's like, okay. And sometimes that's why people are hiring me, is it's to reduce risk. Even though what I'm doing is not necessarily particularly complex, they know that, maybe they'll pay 10 times as much, but they know it's going to get done, and they can't afford to risk it not getting done. So they're willing to pay that premium price because, they know it's going to be done good quality, on time, and that, I won't be a pain in the butt to work with. So
Yeah, I think we leverage this pricing questions to the a little bit mindset or something beyond just talking about the money and the price. And it feels like that you're doing kind of a mentoring type of a process for a lot of viewers. And I just want to ask, are you working with a business coach or a mentor, or do you consider become one for other creatives?
yeah, so right now I'm not working with any business coach or mentor. I mean, I feel like I'm mentored constantly by the community and my colleagues, but no one in particular now. And as far as me becoming a coach or a mentor, there's a little bit of imposter syndrome there where I don't necessarily know, that it would be valuable to me, or how much, valuable for them, or how much I would charge, or, if someone paid me $100 an hour to coach them on their business, would that really be worth it? And I guess that's up to them to decide, just like any project. If they're willing to pay the price and they keep coming back, then they're obviously happy with what they're getting for the amount they're paying. But no, it's not something I'm doing currently, but it is something I've considered. There's people who have reached out about, help. One thing I kind of want to stay away from is, technical help with Blender. Even though that's something I could do, I feel like even less valuable. But there are also cases where people, even if they could figure it out on their own by Googling the answer to their question, they don't want to do that. They just want to have the answer right away. And that's maybe a service that I could provide. So, but then also, yeah, the whole business side. I mean, like the things we're talking about today, I realize that I'm in a fortunate position now where things are going pretty well for me, but I still feel like, there's a lot of situations I haven't dealt with, or scenarios I haven't been in, where, am I really qualified to be giving business advice? And so that in particular is another thing where it's like I don't quite feel ready to do that, but I realize that there is, even if I'm not, top tier agency owner, or maybe I ever will be, that it's still valuable to, pass information on to someone that's just getting started. So it's something I'm interested in. I'm obviously passionate about teaching and, passing knowledge on. So I've considered it, but I just haven't quite figured out the right way to go about that.
Well, I think our conversation, or at least this type of video podcast, we're trying to send it out. We're giving to a lot of creatives or beginners that have valuable information about business. I think probably you're not really designated to become a strategy or marketer or a coach or mentor, but I think the way you're thinking or problem solving still can help a lot of people. So that is why we're interested really highly to do this collaborations, continue to helping our viewers and audience to grow and grow together. So we probably, there are situations we haven't been there, but we can come up together and figure things out, just having the questions come to us. So which towards to the end of this episode, the last questions to be personal related again. We know your business color is orange, and I think it's very cool. And what is your personal favorite color? Is it also orange color?
Yeah, which is funny. A lot of people say the Dirk color is orange, which I always think of it as more of a red. But it's like it's a
Really,
red.
really? Okay, okay.
I think it's like a red orange. Maybe I'm colorblind, or maybe everyone else is colorblind. But I think it's like maybe it's perfectly between red and orange. I would say that's probably my favorite color, but you can also probably see from my background, that I like, primary colors like red, blue, what's the other one? Yellow. But gradients. I also like gradients.
Right?
Yeah,
The
I
red
would
color
say,
in the warm tone.
yeah, a red orange is probably my favorite color if I had to pick one. But I'm a big fan of gradients also, just like, that range from, a warm red to almost like a purple is very relaxing to me.
Awesome. Yes, I feel like a lot of work in your in the previous furniture design or space, you're giving people really a cozy feeling, because I think some sort of a color feeling that you prefer when you're tweaking the color is actually related to your brand color. If I'm
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
I do. A lot of times when I'm putting out any sort of video with my face or posting a photo, I always do kind of warm it up a little bit. I think that it's soothing to me
Oh,
and hopefully others as well.
yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Derek. And this is all the question that I have for this particular episode. And I'm hoping we can continue and to invite you to come back, that we can discussing some of the different topics, and making sure if you, for our subscriber, making sure you subscribe Derek and my channels if you want to learn more about running business and as a freelance artist, and certainly making sure you put your comments or questions under this videos. We want getting more ideas and to talk about it in the future video. And do you have anything to talk about it, Derek, before we say bye?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me on, Wimbo. It's been a pleasure once again. And yes, hopefully we get to have more conversations. And everyone who's watching, be sure you like and subscribe to both of us and leave some good questions below. But no, I think this was great.
All right. Thank you so much, Derek, for your time. And I will see you guys in the next video, guys. Bye.
See ya.